There are people in this world who mistake silence for weakness. And there are moments when that mistake costs them everything. It was the last Saturday of August, and the backyard of the Okafor home on Ridgemont Crescent in Oakville, Ontario, smelled like jerk chicken and fresh-cut grass and something sweeter underneath. Maybe the gardenias that Dorothy Okafor had planted along the fence line every spring for the past 11 years. The tables were covered in white linen. The lights strung between the oak trees hadn't come on yet because the sun was still high. But they would, and when they did, the yard would look like something out of a dream. That was what Dorothy had promised her daughter. That was what this day was supposed to be. Her daughter, Amara, was getting married. I want you to picture this. A woman in her 60s, standing at the kitchen window in a pressed blouse, watching her grandchildren chase each other around the garden chairs and feeling, for the first time in a long time, that everything had worked out the way it was supposed to. Dorothy had worked 34 years as a hospital laundry supervisor at Joseph Brandt. She had raised 3 children in that house on Ridgemont Crescent largely by herself after her husband passed in 2008. She had never asked anyone for anything. She had kept the lawn trimmed and the driveway shoveled and the noise to a minimum even on Christmas Eve, because that was who she was. Because that was what you did when you understood, the way black women of her generation always understood, that you were being watched, that the margin for error was thinner than anyone who hadn't lived it would ever believe. But today, she had allowed herself to stop calculating. Today, there were 83 people in her backyard, a steel pan quartet setting up near the garden shed, a catered spread from a Trinidadian restaurant in Mississauga, and her youngest daughter about to walk down an aisle made of white rose petals in the yard where she had learned to ride a bike. Today, Dorothy had decided, was not a day for being small. The first complaint came at 2:17 in the afternoon. Nobody inside the Okafor yard heard it happen. They found out later, much later, that a woman named Sandra Price, who lived 2 houses north at number 14 Ridgemont Crescent, had called the non-emergency line at Halton Regional Police at 2:17 p.m. and reported a, quote, large and disruptive gathering with excessive noise and uncontrolled minors running unsupervised in the area. She had been living on that street for 3 years. She had attended a block party in the very same backyard in 2022 and eaten Dorothy's rice and peas and said it was the best thing she had ever tasted. She had waved from her driveway. She had borrowed a ladder. And then, when the music started and the laughter carried over the fence and the driveway filled with cars she didn't recognize, something shifted in Sandra Price. Something that maybe had always been there, waiting for a reason. The officer who responded was a constable named Darren Whitlock. He had been on the job for 6 years. He was, by his own account later, a man who liked things orderly. He pulled up to Ridgemont Crescent at 2:41 p.m., stepped out of his cruiser, adjusted his cap, and walked up the driveway of number 10 like he was doing them a favor. He rang the bell. No one heard it over the music. He rang it again. The door was opened by Marcus Webb, Amara's husband-to-be, still in his dress shirt, with his tie loosened, holding a glass of lemonade. Marcus was 38 years old, a civil engineer who had grown up in Brampton and coached youth hockey on weekends. He had a wide, easy smile that he used generously, and he used it now because he didn't yet know what this was. "Hey, can I help you?" Constable Whitlock did not return the smile. He looked past Marcus into the hallway, then back at him. "We got a complaint about noise and an unlawful gathering. I'm going to need to speak to whoever is responsible for this property." Marcus kept his expression even. "That would be Mrs. Okafor. This is her home. We're hosting a private wedding here today. Her daughter's wedding. I'll still need to speak with her." "Of course." Marcus stepped back. "Come in. I'd rather do this outside." Something moved across Marcus's face then, just briefly. Not anger, not yet, just recognition. The particular recognition that black men in Canada learn early and carry always, like a frequency you can't stop hearing once you know it's there. He nodded slowly and stepped onto the porch. "I'll go get her." Dorothy came to the door 2 minutes later. She wiped her hands on a small towel and tucked it into her apron pocket and looked at Constable Whitlock. with the patient steadiness of a woman who had dealt with a great many difficult things in her life and learned to meet them all the same way. "Good afternoon," she said. "Ma'am, I'm responding to a noise complaint from a neighbor. How many people do you have back there?" "About 80, 85. It's a wedding." "You have a permit for an event this size?" Dorothy blinked. "A permit. An outdoor gathering permit. Halton Region requires a permit for outdoor events exceeding 50 people when amplified sound is involved." Dorothy looked at him for a long moment. "Constable, this is a private event on private property. My daughter is getting married in 2 hours. My guests are family and friends." "I understand that, ma'am. But if there's amplified music..." "There is a steel pan quartet. They are acoustic musicians." Whitlock glanced toward the backyard. From where he stood, he could hear something. Laughter. Voices layered over each other, the soft percussion of the pans warming up. He could also, had he been paying any attention, have heard children, and a toast being practiced, and someone telling someone else that the flowers were beautiful. "I'm still going to need you to turn down any speakers and reduce the number of guests to 50 or below, or I'll have to issue a noise violation." Dorothy Okafor did not raise her voice. She had not raised her voice at anyone in longer than she could remember. She looked at this young man in his uniform and she said quietly, "I would like you to give me the specific bylaw number you are citing, please." Whitlock paused. "Pardon?" "The bylaw number. The specific municipal regulation you are relying on to make this request." He shifted his weight. "I don't have the number on me. Then I would ask you to please wait here while I make a phone call." She went inside. She did not hurry. She moved with the same unhurried calm she had carried her entire adult life. Through labor wards and long shifts and the slow grief of widowhood and every small humiliation that a woman in her position had been asked to absorb without making a scene. She walked through her kitchen past the trays of food and the flower arrangements and the 3 women from her church who were arranging desserts, and she picked up her phone and she called her daughter. Not Amara, who was upstairs in a white dress with a veil pinned to her hair and her maid of honor trying not to cry. Her other daughter. Her eldest, Constable Whitlock, stood on the porch for 9 minutes. He counted. He watched the party continue. A child ran past the gate with a ribbon. 2 older men settled into lawn chairs with their drinks. A woman in a coral dress laughed at something and covered her mouth. He was aware, in some background part of his thinking, that this was not exactly what a crime scene looked like. But Sandra Price had called, and he had come, and now he had said what he said, and he was not the type of man who backed down from what he'd said. At the 9-minute mark, the front door opened. Dorothy came out first. Behind her came a woman who appeared to be in her early 40s, still in her traveling clothes, dark slacks, a blazer she hadn't had time to change out of, a carry-on bag's worth of airport stillness about her. She had arrived, it would turn out, less than an hour before, straight from conference in Vancouver that had kept her away all week. She had driven from the airport in a rental car because she had not wanted to miss her sister's wedding. She had pulled up to the house 20 minutes ago and slipped through the side gate and been helping with the centerpieces when her mother called. Her name was Dr. Josephine Okafor Mensah. She was a Superior Court judge in the province of Ontario. She had been appointed to the bench 7 years ago, after 15 years as a Crown prosecutor in Toronto. Before that, she had clerked for the Supreme Court of Canada. She had argued cases that had reshaped the way evidentiary rules were applied in this country. She had, over the course of her career, seen the inside of more courtrooms than she could count, from every angle. As student, as advocate, as the person sitting at the bench whose word was final. She walked out onto the porch of her mother's house and looked at Constable Whitlock with the same expression she used when counsel tried something in her courtroom that they thought she hadn't noticed. She let him look at her for a moment. "Constable," she said, "I'm Justice Okafor Mensah of the Ontario Superior Court. What bylaw are you citing?" Whitlock opened his mouth, closed it. He looked at Dorothy, then back at her. His hand moved slightly toward the notebook on his belt. "I was responding to a noise complaint from a..." "What bylaw?" Josephine said again, not loudly, not unkindly, with the patience of someone who has asked a question and knows it will be answered. "Are you citing to justify issuing a violation notice for a private event held on private residential property in a municipality where no outdoor gathering permit is required for private residential functions of any size?" Whitlock did not answer. Because Halton Region Bylaw 9-2019 covers public spaces and commercial venues, it does not apply to private residential property, and the noise ordinance under Regional Municipality of Halton Bylaw 66-2014 allows amplified sound on private property until 11 p.m. on weekends. She paused. "It is 2:43 in the afternoon. My mother's guests are seated for a wedding ceremony. There is no amplification. There is a quartet." A car went by on the street. A bird moved in the oak tree at the edge of the yard. Whitlock's face had undergone a shift that was almost geological in its slowness. The movement of a man who has realized by degrees that the ground under him is not what he thought it was. I wasn't aware. Did you verify the bylaw before issuing your request to reduce guest numbers and disable the music?" "I was responding to a complaint." "From which neighbor?" He didn't answer. "Constable." Josephine's voice dropped a register, which somehow made it more arresting, not less. "My mother has lived on this street for 11 years. She has never received a noise complaint, a bylaw notice, or any kind of official concern from anyone. Today, on the day of her daughter's wedding, someone has called the police based on a complaint that does not correspond to any actual legal violation. I want you to think carefully about what happened here, and why." She looked at him steadily. "I also want you to know that I understand you may have responded in good faith to an incomplete understanding of the applicable bylaws, and I am willing to proceed on that basis, as long as we are clear that this event will continue without interruption, and that the record will show this call was unfounded." Whitlock looked at her for a long moment. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I'm sorry for the interruption." He was back in his cruiser in 4 minutes. What happened next? The part that Sandra Price had not counted on, the part that she would spend a long time thinking about afterward, was that Josephine Okafor Mensah did not simply let it go. That was not who she was. It was not how she had been raised. And it was not, after 15 years as a Crown prosecutor and 7 on the bench, how her mind worked. She was a woman who believed in process. She believed in documentation. She believed that patterns only became visible when someone took the trouble to write them down. The following Monday morning, Josephine filed a formal complaint with the Halton Regional Police Services Board, citing procedural concerns about the response to an unfounded noise complaint at a private residential address. She did not file it under her own name. She filed it on behalf of Dorothy Evelyn Okafor, homeowner 10 Ridgemont Crescent, Oakville. She filed it because her mother had lived in that house for 11 years and she deserved that much. The internal review that followed turned up 3 other complaints filed against the same address at 10 Ridgemont Crescent over the past 2 years. A noise complaint from the previous Christmas. A complaint about vehicles blocking the road during a family gathering in June. A complaint about unsupervised minors reported the prior summer during a children's birthday party. Every single complaint had originated from the same address, number 14 Ridgemont Crescent, Sandra Price. The review also found that Constable Whitlock had cited the wrong bylaw in his notes, twice, and that the CAD record, the call log from dispatch, showed the complaint had described the gathering as aggressive and threatening, language that did not appear anywhere in the body camera, footage of his exchange with Dorothy and Marcus on the porch. The footage that Sandra Price had not known existed. The Halton Regional Police issued a formal letter of apology to Dorothy Okafor. Constable Whitlock was required to complete additional training in residential bylaw enforcement and community relations. The record of the call was annotated as unfounded. Sandra Price received a letter from the municipality informing her that filing false or misleading statements in a bylaw complaint could result in legal consequences under Section 140 of the Criminal Code of Canada. Public mischief. She also received, 2 months later, a formal notice that she was being named in a civil action for harassment and racial discrimination under the Ontario Human Rights Code, filed by Dorothy Okafor with the assistance of her daughter. Sandra Price hired a lawyer. The lawyer told her, in terms that left little room for interpretation, that the complainant's daughter was a superior court judge who had spent 15 years as a Crown prosecutor and had more courtroom experience than everyone in their firm combined. The case was settled. Dorothy Okafor used the settlement to re-landscape her backyard. She added a pergola. She had the oak tree pruned. She planted more gardenias along the fence. On the day the new garden was finished, she had a small gathering. 20 people, music, good food, the same steel pan quartet from the wedding. She set one of the lawn chairs in the exact spot where Amara and Marcus had exchanged their vows, and she sat there in the late afternoon light, and she let herself feel all of it. Not the complaint. Not the officer's face or the bylaw she had already looked up herself before Josephine arrived, or the particular exhaustion of having to justify your right to exist in your own backyard on the day of your daughter's wedding. She knew those feelings well. She had been carrying them for 62 years, and she would probably carry them for whatever years remained. But underneath all of it, was something that did not go away. Her daughter had come home for the wedding. She had come straight from the airport, still in her traveling clothes, and she had stood on that porch, and she had known exactly what to say. Not because she was powerful, though she was. Not because she was brilliant, though she was, but because Dorothy had raised her to know that silence was not the same as peace. That enduring something was not the same as accepting it. That you could be still and composed and speak in a voice that did not shake, and still refuse to let what was wrong remain unanswered. That was what she had given her daughters. That was what no one could take back. I think about Dorothy Okafor sometimes, not because her story is unusual. And that's the part that should sit with all of us for a moment, because it isn't. The Sandra Prices of this world are ordinary. They live on ordinary streets in ordinary towns, and they make calls that they believe they have every right to make. They don't see what they're doing as hatred. They call it concern. They call it order. They call it just wanting the neighborhood to be peaceful. And the Dorothys of this world absorb it. Year after year, Christmas to Christmas, birthday party to birthday party. They trim the lawn and shovel the driveway and turn down the music a little. And they do not complain because they understand that complaining costs something that peace of mind sometimes can't afford. But here's what I keep coming back to. What I want to leave you with today. Dorothy Okafor did not win because her daughter was a judge. She deserved to win because she was right, because her mother was right, because they were in their own home, on their own property, on a Saturday afternoon in August, and they had done nothing wrong, not one single thing, except exist loudly enough for someone to notice. The judge was there. But she didn't make Dorothy's case just by being powerful. She made it by doing what Dorothy had already decided to do. She did not apologize. She did not minimize. She did not make it easier for Constable Whitlock to leave that porch, feeling like none of this had been his fault. She asked for the bylaw number. That's it. That's the whole thing. Know your rights well enough to ask for the number, and then ask for it out loud, without flinching, and wait. If this story made you feel something today, anger or recognition, or that specific kind of pride that comes from watching someone refuse to be made small, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments. Tell me if you've been Dorothy, or if you've watched someone you love be Dorothy, or if this is a world you're only beginning to understand. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, send it to them. My name is Harmon Tales, and I'll see you in the next one.